Good morning. I'm Brenna Clanton. I'm the Ministerial Intern here at UUCR. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Before I begin, I'd like to start with a poem. A poem from a beloved ancestor, former intern here at UUCR, Matthew P. Taylor. Before I read it, I would like to pause for a moment of silence, for a moment of any memories that might be showing up. This is The Change by Matthew P. Taylor. I can feel the change coming like growing pains. I feel the change in my bones, pulling me, stretching me, forming me into the true I am. Can you feel it? The change in our bodies as we adapt, grow, change, the weight shifting and molding to fit. This evolving body that we are in, guided by faith that this too will pass. We can survive because our ancestors did. Can you feel them in our DNA? You, a mixture of their particles that was molded to fit your spirit, change and shift, mold and grow, yet in some ways, we stay the same. This month, as I've been reflecting on resistance, Matthew's poem has grounded me. For me, resistance is subtle, shifting, yet in some ways, staying the same. Resistance on the surface is often thought as something active, such as holding a sign at a protest, even lighting a candle at a vigil. What if it's like what Matthew describes? Pulling, stretching, forming. What if it's like weaving? Taking a piece of reed or string, pushing and pulling in and out. Subtle movements that you may not notice. And then all of a sudden, you have a basket or a piece of cloth. Thank you all for continuing to do the work that the children started on the looms. What a wonderful embodied practice that includes our entire community. If you are so moved, as was mentioned before, keep those looms moving. I want to thank Reverend Morgan for being our encourager of looms. I saw her walking around earlier. And when service is over, we will have a table in fellowship where we can continue to weave together as a community. When I looked up the definition of resistance, and I'll keep a couple variations here, but the first one that showed up was the refusal to accept or comply with something. I've been guilty of this. And it can be a good thing sometimes, not when my kids avoid curfew, but. Anyone else guilty of the refusal to accept or comply with something? Can I get an amen? Amen. So another possible resistance, and again, my kids are also guilty of this, is denial. So not doing something, resisting something because of denial or fear. I've been guilty of this. Anyone else? So I'm going to speak to this for a moment. And I heard the comment earlier during our prayer and centering, I will not take us too deep into the land of orthopedics. Marie. And I will use a recent experience of mine as an example. So many of you know that I've recently had knee surgery, and several of you have shared your own experiences of similar procedures with me. And I may have joked that my decision was because of our now annual UUCR New Year's hike on the Billy Goat Trail. I'm going to tell him myself. I turned back halfway through. At a coffee date, I said. And it was shared with me later, for those who stuck with the whole hike, that I missed the rock scrambling. Perfect timing, don't you think? I can't blame the Billy Goat Trail for my knee woes. It's been x-rays, MRIs, and years of resisting, denying the doctor's advice. And I continued to run, which was the source of my arthritis in the first place. So for years, running has been a spiritual practice for me. And as I take you through this resistance and my journey, I would invite you to think of your own spiritual practice. In the book, Everyday Spiritual Practice, Scott Alexander writes, I was often asked what makes an everyday spiritual practice different from a casual spiritual hobby. Alexander says it is three things: intentionality, regularity, and depth. I think many of our spiritual practices may have beginnings as hobbies. In the book, there are many essays about hobbies and tasks like cooking, like quilting, and recycling that could be considered either. And it's important to note that not every hobby needs to become a spiritual practice. Some things are just meant to be things that we do. As a young adult, I identified as a long-distance runner, and it was very much a hobby. When my dad was alive, we ran road races together, including the Chicago Marathon. He used to joke that the first race we ever ran together was when I was a toddler, and I accidentally got into an elevator on my own. He sprinted up the stairs trying to catch me. At the races we actually ran together, there was a sense of pride in the distances we ran, and sometimes the personal best that came with hard training. But at some point, this shifted for me, and it became a spiritual practice. I found a running group that ran every Sunday morning at Burke Lake Park in Northern Virginia, with an unpaved trail that meanders around the lake. You all are going to have to share with me the parks here that do the same. I know they exist. So there were mornings where I would just soak in the nature, the nurturing community, and the sense of accomplishment, all before church on a Sunday morning. And I'll tell on myself again here. Sometimes this rivaled church for me. I resisted signing up as a worship associate, so I didn't have to get to church too early. Amen. Wasn't expecting that. Instead, I taught RE, so I'd have time to go home and take a shower after a long run. And I'm so sure that my co-teachers appreciated that. So as you think about your own spiritual practices that are meaningful for you, take into account those three aspects: the intentionality, the regularity, the depth. What do those look like for you? For me, I was intentional about running in nature, with community. I practiced regularly, pretty regularly, and I even, for a while, was coaching girls at our local elementary school on running. And then I like to think that the depth came more slowly. First, it was a connection to a loved one, and then a deep connection to nature. So given all of this, it makes sense that I resisted the need to stop running. When the pain started showing up in my left leg, I did everything possible to not stop. I spent several years resisting the doctor's advice and trying to fix the problem myself. Does this sound familiar? While continuing to run until I couldn't and had to slow down. So one of the other definitions of resistance is the impeding, slowing, or stopping effect exerted by one material thing on another. What if it wasn't one material thing on another? What if it was something more spiritual causing that resistance? Where might resistance show up in your own spiritual practice? So when I finally made the decision to schedule the surgery, and it was well before the Billy Goat Trail, by the way, and it was a huge practice of self-care for me, another form of resistance started to show up. This is another one I am too guilty of doing. Although I heard someone say that this was a chance for me to start healthier patterns of moving around in the world, it was hard for me to listen to others talk about the importance of rest and healing. I will admit I called the surgeon's office a few times asking, when can I go back to work? And when can I start driving again? And yet, with the love and support of those around me and some not so subtle reminders from a few colleagues, I was able to take the time and rest I needed. We all need to take the time to rest. One of my favorite quotes about the need for rest comes from Tricia Hersey, founder of the NAP Ministry. Has anyone found her work? It is beautiful. She writes, "Rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. Both of these toxic systems refuse to see the inherent divinity of human beings and have used human bodies as a tool for production, evil, and violence for centuries. Grind culture has made us into human machines and willing and ready to donate our lives to a capitalist system that thrives by placing profit over people." So healthier patterns have indeed shown up for me, a shift I noticed that has come gradually. Hiking a nearby trail has become my new spiritual practice. It gives me a chance to look around a little more, and I realize as I'm saying this, I'm sharing an experience I've had. So while there may be some active runners out there, there may be many other spiritual practices. I love to hear what's near and dear to your heart and realize that I get to share this experience that has been pivotal for me. It has been my love of walking that has inspired me to try new things. So in the past few weeks, I've slowly increased my mileage. I'm going to balance that there. And I would walk underneath this beautiful pine tree, and I noticed that it had a multitude of needles. So I collected a few, and I made a basket. I was inspired by one of my favorite books. Has anyone read Braiding Sweetgrass? So this is not a sweetgrass basket. It's a pine needle basket. But Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, talks about the art of making baskets, using braids of sweetgrass, braiding into strips of ash to make baskets. Sweetgrass grew plentifully along the banks of the Mohawk River in the 1700s. It disappeared when the Mohawks fled their homelands in the Mohawk Valley to the Canadian border. Replanting sweetgrass a few centuries later became an integral part of reclaiming the land, the language, and the spirit of the Mohawk people. As Kimmerer writes, a place becomes a home when it sustains you, when it feeds you in body as well as in spirit. To recreate a home, the plants must also return. In this way, planting or replanting becomes a spiritual practice one of resistance. When the grass is ready to be harvested, it can be turned into a basket. And one of the recurring themes that I heard, both in Kimmerer's work as well as on the YouTube videos I watched to make this, is responsible harvesting. Leave enough for the earth, leave enough to compost, leave enough for others. Resistance against a sense of entitlement, or the capitalistic culture of never having enough. Kimmerer touches on this resistance when she writes, "The marvel of a basket is in its transformation. Its journey from wholeness as a living plant to fragmented strands, and back to wholeness again as a basket. A basket knows the dual powers of destruction and creation that shape the world. Strands once separated are rewoven into a new whole. The journey of a basket is also the journey of a people." Remember Matthew's poem. The change in our body as we adapt, grow, change. They are talking about our journey to wholeness. This is a journey of a people that shows up in our bodies, in baskets. It holds so much. Childhood memories of running, picking grasses, of the elders gathering to create and laugh together. As Matthew describes in their poem, our ancestors' DNA is within us. Can you feel it? They are asking us to resist, to care for ourselves as we reclaim the past of our ancestors. It is an art of weaving when we do this. A push and a pull, a transformation, and back to some of the same. It is blessed resistance. May it be so. Blessed be.